Segment 4, trade. Lots of questions about trade, China, the rest of the world. Here's from a Ricochet member who calls herself Midget Faded Rattlesnake. If you read her post, she's highly intelligent and very amusing. I don't know where the name comes from, but here's the question. How much should people really worry about the balance of trade?
Somewhat less than you worry about being struck by lightning.
Okay, here's a statistic I heard just the other day. Here's how many cars Korea sells in the United States every year. 500,000. Here's how many cars we sell in Korea every year. 5,000. Why shouldn't we be worried about that imbalance?
I'm not sure why we should. Obviously, if the Americans were Americans forced at gunpoint to buy these cars from Korea?
Clearly not. No. So no problem.
I don't see why third parties should concern themselves about it.
Okay, you've done it again. You've batted away the question so easily that it leaves me wondering what the argument is on the other side. Why do some people worry about the trade balance then?
Oh, because the argument they're making is that this is sending American jobs abroad. Now, unfortunately, this argument was made some years ago in 1930. 1,000 economists took out full-page ads across the country saying, do not put up international trade restrictions. It will not increase employment. It will just set off a new round of retaliation. It was one of those wonderful things the media like. It was a bipartisan effort. The Democratic Congress wanted to pass the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and the Republican president signed it into law. And it was one of the biggest disasters in the history of the country. At the time this law, people think that the reason for the high unemployment in the 30s was because of the stock market crash.
Right.
After the stock market crash, unemployment peaked at 9% for 1 month and started downward. It was down to 6.3% before the federal government intervened. It was only after the federal government intervened that the downward movement reversed itself and shot all up over a few years to 25%. So the people who are out there just dying for the government to come in with their solution, I don't know if they have studied history or not.
What's the correct way? Here I'm interested in the way to think about the problem. China. There are constant predictions that soon, maybe within a decade or so, the Chinese economy will become as big as ours. So, bigger economy than ours, that sounds in some way something about which we ought to be nervous. On the other hand, there are 14 times as many Chinese as Americans. So when their economy becomes as big as ours, it only means that their per capita GDP will be 1/14 that of ours. So should we be worried about what the growth of China?
The Chinese should be worried as to why their economy is so far behind that of the United States.
All right.
Although I must say, their economy is enormously better than it was in the days of Mao.
Right.
And is so as a result of putting in more market, allowing more freedom in the market, just as in the past couple of years we're trying to reduce the freedom of the market.
Well, okay, so let me take the United States out of it for a second. At the end of the Cold War, Russia, as we were allowed to call it once again, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, Russia embraced democracy pretty rigorously under Boris Yeltsin. True election to the Duma and so forth, and suffered an economic collapse from which they have never recovered. China embraces the markets to a limited extent, but still a very extensive extent, but refuses to touch democracy, refuses to permit political freedoms, and experiences this period of some 2 decades now of economic growth, unparalleled really for a country of that size anywhere at any point in human history. So what does that tell us about the connection between democracy and economic growth? We Americans like to talk about democratic capitalism as though the two are somehow intertwined. Are they not?
Well, China has proven that they're not inevitably so. There are a lot of things that you have to make an economy work. First of all, you have to allow the people, allow the market to work. And in Russia, when the new capitalists were simply the old communists who had taken over the industries, you didn't have capitalism in the real sense of the word. You had what some have called crony capitalism, and you had people who disappear off the streets when they, get in the way of what the government wants to do. So it's really, I think, sub-Rosa fascism Fascism being different from socialism in that the private ownership is there, but the government tells people what to do.
And what about China? Do you believe that they can continue to sustain high economic growth rates without some semblance of democracy, without beginning to open up political freedoms? Can they?
I think they are doing some of that, and particularly as you get larger and larger numbers of people who are successful in the private marketplace and who then begin to have influence, and as the old guard dies out, I think, but it'll be a very slow process. I mean, I wouldn't hold a stopwatch on it.
All right. From China to Europe. Here in the United States, nobody would start talking about the threat to the dollar as a currency if Texas experiences a high growth rate and Michigan experiences high unemployment and manufacturing decline. Nobody talks about that as a threat. But in Europe, we see that the troubles in Greece and Ireland and now Spain and Portugal are being talked about as a threat to the euro. Why?
Because they're trying to create something that a country would create in a situation where you have sovereign states. And so you can't have a common currency and then have each government go off on its own little tangent, because they'll end up in situations where that common currency is threatened because of what someone did in Greece or Spain.
So do you consider the euro untenable over the longer term?
I don't know, but because people can always change their policies, and personally, I never thought it was such a great idea.
What would you have done instead? Just permit?
What they've done for centuries.
All right.
Have each,
Deutschmark, Lira.
That's it.
All right.